519, a short story written by James Airy. My hazy vision thrust my eyes around, seeing double, as the nurse rolled me down the hallway, abruptly stopping, spinning me around and pushing me into my room, 519. The indescribable smell of a fresh, warm hospital blanket as the nurse gently lays it across me. The rest of the evening was what to be expected. The nurses coming in and out to check on me, my girlfriend trying to slip me a hug before heading out. In just a moment before the clunky clock struck 9:09, the nurses came in for what I assumed to give me my last injection to help me ease the pain from surgery. They leaned me up, firmly checking my vitals, slipped me a remote in my hand, and walked off without a word. Soon after, while the TV played static from poorly tuned antennas, I dozed off. Deep in sleep, at about 3:02, I woke up to a loud thump knock. My raspy, broken, tired voice yelped out, "You can come in." The bathroom door across the room, blocked by the divider curtain, slowly cracked open, creaking and shuddering, the shadow reflecting off the floor just enough for me to see it at a glance under the wavering curtain. My heart rate thumped, ravaging and shaking my hands, the slow slapping of the weathered feet against the cold grim floor, hitting like the thump of a slow pulse. The sound crept from the bathroom door to the curtain's edge right before stopping. The room went eerie silence, staring and waiting for what next. I saw the entrance door swing open suddenly, swiftly walking in a nurse, looking at me in the eyes and asking if I was okay and if I needed anything. For a moment, I just stared at her. Yet I surely felt a lot safer now she was here. I mumbled out some words the nurse hardly understand. She smiled and said, "Don't worry, I'll give you a bit more medicine." She walked around my bed, firmly grasping my arm. My eyes felt heavy and fluttering out while looking at the nurse, and then suddenly between blinks, she was gone. Dazed and confused, I just passed out. Waking up in the morning, the sunlight bouncing off the walls, another nurse walked in and said, "Well, it's glad to see you're awake. You made a bit of a mess, didn't you?" I gave her a confused, uneasy look. I told her, "Miss, I didn't get out of bed." She gave me a deep glare, looking me over and seeing my bed was still tightly packed in. Looking towards the bathroom, it appeared the door was still open, with everything tossed around. I mentioned I was glad that the nurse stopped in to check on me late at that night. She gave me a slight giggle and said, "Oh dear, there was no other nurses on duty besides me last night. We were quite low-staffed." Gulping and eagerly waiting to leave, I felt goosebumps run down my shaken spine. Since that night, I've been terrified of that hospital. I never really told anybody I knew personally about the experience. Ghost stories from Reddit. Writer DoubleChard8733. Can you tell me the story that made you believe in ghosts? Here's my story. I used to work as a bartender on a military base, and one of the most memorable nights was Halloween. We had gone all out with decorations, including a skeleton perched on a barrel. Whenever somebody passed by, it would giggle and pretend to pour a bottle down its throat while spouting pirate sayings. One eerie night, as I was closing up the bar all by myself, I switched off the decorations and locked all the doors. Just when I thought everything was in order, a strange sensation made the hair on my back of my neck stand on end. Startled, I turned around, promptly by the sound of someone clearing their throat. That's when things took a bizarre turn. The skeleton suddenly sprang to life, as if somebody had just walked past it. I was perplexed because I knew I had turned it off, and there was no one else in the bar. I decided to investigate, and found the switch was in the off position, which left me baffled. Without giving it much thought, I removed the batteries and stashed them in my pocket. While counting down till the end, an unsettling feeling of being watched crept over me. Finally done with my tasks, I was ready to leave for home. However, just as I approached the employee exit, I heard the pirate skeleton eerie laughter once again. Without a second thought, I bolted to my car. Tenet Ghost, a horror story from Reddit by Flavor Ocio. I cannot read that name. The story will be linked down below. I'm a landlord. I own 2 small houses next to mine, so I rent them out to families. One of my tenants was a 55-year-old economist who's been renting for about 10 years. He lives with his son and his older mother. Last Tuesday, I got home from work around 5 p.m. and I found an ambulance in front of his house, and I see them loading him up on one of the ambulances, and the rest of his family even some of the other nephews I knew, rushing to the car to follow the ambulance. I texted the son. I told him I hope his father recovers soon. The next day I got to work early, but forgot some paperwork at home, so I decided to use my lunchtime to get them. As I'm approaching my driveway, I see my tenant, the one who was taken by ambulance the day before, shirtless and on the sidewalk, talking angry to someone over his cell phone. This was quite normal on him. He had a bad temper and preferred to walk in front of his house while talking on the phone. All I could think about was that perhaps it was something so big that he was back on his feet again. I got my papers and left, not giving it a second thought. On Friday, my mom asked me if I knew how everything was going with the tenants, since she heard rumors that he died on the hospital. I told her that it was not possible since I saw him going strong the next day. Then on Saturday, the son called me, told me his father died on Wednesday, and that they were vacating the house. My step-grandma, who lives just a couple houses down the street, also said that she saw him the very same day I did, also talking on his cell phone on the sidewalk. It was about 1 p.m. Plain in sight, did I see a ghost? The ambulance company that I used to work for had a haunted ambulance, Rig 12. Recounts Reddit.com user Zerbo. A lot of EMTs had stories about it, but I never put much stock into paranormal stuff. That is, until I had my own experience with Rig 12. My partner and I were working in a rural community at 3 a.m., and it was pitch dark and completely quiet. We were both dozing off. I was in the driver's seat and she was in the passenger seat. I woke up to a muffled voice, but I thought my partner was talking. I told her I was trying to sleep and closing my eyes. I distinctly heard a male voice say, "Oh my God, am I dying?" followed by a few seconds of heavy breathing. My partner and I sat up straight and looked back into the patient compartment where it sounded like the voices had come from. Things were quiet for a couple of seconds, then we heard a click of an oxygen bottle regulator and a hiss, as if it was leaking. I turned on the lights and we ran out of the rig. I thought a transcendent might have climbed in while we were asleep, so we opened the rear doors. No one was there. I checked the oxygen bottles. Neither were opened. We didn't sleep much after that. My first night shift from Reddit user Liz Strong. Okay, I have a pretty interesting story. Please note when this happened, I would have been about 19. I'm from Australia, and I used to work at a 24/7 rural petrol station in a small town called Burham. It's on the Murphy River, and if you don't know, there are quite a few spooky stories around the river, and if you ask any local, they will have a story to tell. Anyways, when I started the job, I was told not to mind the shadows that you may see get picked up on security cameras. As these cameras were constantly recording, you could watch the cameras on a small TV behind the counter. My boss said that they would come and go around the petrol pumps, and sometimes the light would go out over the pumps. He said to ignore it, and if you want, you can stay in the back room until a customer walks in. When I asked why, what are they? In most Aussies possible way, he goes, because they aren't customers, they aren't your friends. Shit happens if you acknowledge them. With this, I started my first graveyard shift. Lucky for me, they had to put someone else on shift with me, but that did not prepare me for that night. It got to about 2 a.m. in the morning, before things started getting weird. Every now and then the fridge lights would flicker, or the radio would go in and out of static. But what was truly upsetting was watching this figure on the camera go back and forth just on the edge where the overhead lights for the pump stopped and beyond just being pitch dark road. The other worker, his name was Tony, could also see it and seemed to try and ignore it. Felt like he was trying not to seem spooked for my sake. Bless you, Tony. What was strange was that when the car headlights shone onto the road where the figure was pacing, it just vanished, confirming that it wasn't physical. The owner of the car finished filling up and came to the counter to pay. I tried my hardest not to look like I'd just seen a ghost, but what the man said next to me just tipped me over that night. He said, "Just had my first experience with a ghost car. I see his taillights and then suddenly gone. Creepy shit out of the bushes tonight." The understatement of the year. Needless to say, I am not ashamed to admit that I quit that job after 4 days, as I could not bring myself to work with another night shift at that place. And still to this day, I don't know how anybody could. It was a wild experience. We fast forward a couple months later, and I had to go to a mate's house for a bonfire. on his parents' property. We would call this gathos. We would burn off garden waste and sit around fire having a chat with a few drinks. It was always very chill. It was mid-July, so it was quite a cold night. Now, this small town, it's not so uncommon to know everybody, especially teenagers. So it was no surprise to see Tony from the petrol station at the Gatho. I knew I had to pick this guy's brain for some context of what happened that night. As soon as I sat down to chat with him, we got talking. I remember saying, "You know, you got out of that place at just the right time." I asked him, "Why was that? Did something happen?" He said, "One of them managed to speak. I saw the shadow pacing, but then it started to call my name." I remember at this point that poor Tony looked really uncomfortable. I remember his eyes getting teary when he said it sounded like my mom. She passed away when I was like 12. He struggled so hard to get the next part out. It showed up every night after that, using the same voice to ask me to come outside. I quit about 2 weeks after you did because of that, and I still can't get the voices out of my head. It sounded like my mom, but it was way too sinister. When he said that part, I felt the chills you get in your butt cheeks, the kind that you know you are being told it's legit. Even if it wasn't paranormal encounters, whatever Tony did hear or see really got him. After that, a few more of us joined in the conversation. We talked about our encounters and other things we saw out in the bush. Now I live far away. Life is completely different, but the paranormal doesn't stop. Ever since that night, I've had a huge interest in the paranormal and started to find tools for skeptical thinking. I learned pretty quick that most of the time paranormal activity can definitely be explained, but I do have a few more stories of encounters I have had but cannot explain to this day. But Burham will forever be the most haunted place I ever lived. I'm convinced that the land is haunted there. I'm going back there in the winter, back to the petrol station to see if I can capture this encounter again. Make sure you subscribe, and if you like this short eerie story written and read by James Eerie, let me know.